the Overman Warrior Podcast.
Hi, Rich Hoffman here. One thing I don't like is being lied to, and this goes back to anthropology class I had in high school a long time ago. I had read a lot of books, and so when I was in my junior and senior years in high school, I knew more than the teachers knew by quite a lot. Even going back into sixth grade, fifth grade, all my history classes, I was way ahead of the teachers teaching the classes. So I knew a lot of what they told me was wrong, and I'd endure it and just sort of slug through it just because you had to win your freedom and graduate and get away from the kind of mentality that is it's held back institutionalized science for many years. So that's been my perspective, and all through my 20s, I heavily read Joseph Campbell, and I was part of the Joseph Campbell Foundation, so I've always been interested in these kinds of topics. I've been on quite a few adventures around the world that cascaded into a unique set of understandings and knowledge that go beyond the accepted sciences. And one thing that's always bothered me is I live in Southern Ohio, and I've always had a relationship with the Serpent Mound. My wife and I have been married about 39 years now, and we've gone to Serpent Mound every so often, every few years, all of our entire marriage. And there's all kinds of earthworks that are very advanced that do not fit the narrative of the indigenous people as we're supposed to politically accept it. There's instead been a larger story, and I think we're just now getting to it. There's talk about the offshoots of that culture being people from Atlantis, the fallen realms of Atlantis, ancient history going way back, whether it was Mormons, or going back tens of thousands of years or millions of years, pre-Ice Age, right up to the Ice Age causing the Younger Dryas catastrophe and wiping out that previous civilization. Either way, the thing never sat well with me that all the mounds that were in Southern Ohio were dedicated to burials. Clearly not. Certainly not with Newark, certainly not with Miamisburg, certainly not with Fort Ancient, which is near my home, Fortified Hill, which is right down the road from my house. Right across the river, there's the Middletown Mound that was excavated and had obviously looted. Don't know what happened because the top of the mound has been torn away. They did the same thing at Miamisburg Mound, which I talk about a lot because it really bothers me that it sits right there and nobody studies it. So when you want to understand why these things are like that, not that long ago, my daughter was at a very rare one of those used bookstores where you can sometimes find really eclectic treasures. And she was in a used bookstore in Middletown, downtown Middletown. And downtown Middletown's not a happy place to be these days. It's pretty rough. So I was concerned she was even there. But she's like, "Dad, you got to come down here. Got to come down here right now." So I go down there right now, and she's holding this book for me. The guy who runs the place, is one of those books that comes, and as soon as people find out about it, it goes. So my daughter found it and sat on it like a hen on an egg, making sure that I didn't lose sight of this book. And it was this book here. Prehistoric World or vanished races. And I would say a combination of both. And this is the premise. This was written in 1885. This is an original book from 1885. That's why it's so special. It's barely hanging together. I went down and bought this from him for a reasonable price, I think, for a book like this that I think is pretty rare, especially in this format. And I don't know that it's for everybody, but it's for me, for sure. This is a remarkable chronicling by E.A. Allen. There's a better way to kind of look at the title page. As you go through here, I've read archaeology books. This is 1885, and you really couldn't get around very fast, but by horse or by train. And the trains only went to specific places. So to go around and chronicle most of the mountains of the Ohio River Valley that is chronicled in this book was extraordinary. And he covers Mexico, the Aztec culture, down all the way into central Mexico. Covers the world in a lot of ways. But really the second half of this 800-page book is dedicated to essentially the Miami Valley and Mississippi to some Mississippi cultures to some extent. And I think one of the greatest mysteries, and this is again 1885, and I've got it marked in here. This is the mound that is at the current. Look at that thing, that effigy. So this is a very large point across the river, Great Miami River, from the Joyce Park, where Joyce Park has been, right along River Road there. Straight across, there's two high peaks, and it's where they have the Pyramid Hill, is just to the north of this structure. So it's two large hills, and this hill had been carved into this effigy, and it's quite a mystery. And this was down the road from where I grew up, and nobody ever talked about it. Only recently has anybody started to talk about it, but it's in this book from 1885. None of the history teachers ever talked about it. We never took field trips over there. We went to field trips. We'd go to Fort Ancient. I remember going on a camping trip there with a class, and when they told us how Indians were buried in there, and it was so sad that the Indians were destroyed by Columbus. And never talked about this kind of stuff. But this is evidence of a culture that obviously, whatever relationship the North American Indian had to the mound builders, was one that was on the declining side of the Vico cycle. So it was a return to the primitive from an advanced culture. So these people were obviously building very advanced astrological alignments that did not make sense of the day, and they certainly didn't make sense to burial alignments as we think of them. So when you go through this book and you see what was reported in this very adventurous book at the time, you realize that we built our entire institutional science on the wrong premise, and that this was more accurate for its day than what our modern assumptions are. And this is, I use this as this fortified hill. Again, this is right down the road from downtown Hamilton, Ohio. It's right across from the Joyce Park, very common area, very densely populated area, right by Fairfield. That right there. And you can look and see it's a high peak, and it's built. That whole hillside was constructed into this bore to kind of reflect the constellation of the Aries at the time. So it's thought to be 5,000 years old. It has alignments to stars that they shouldn't have known about at the time. And it shows a part of a larger mystery that involves serpent mounds, of course, in here. I think the lesson here is the scientific approach. It's a relic from Palenque, Mexico. So this book was written at a time where it's difficult to get the information, and it had an adventurous approach to science that I think we're returning to now. The institutionalized failures and what it's presented to us and the assumptions that they gave us are turning out to be all incorrect. So now you have the adventure of science returning to this kind of consideration. And I think that's wonderful. It's why I love this book. It's why my daughter said, "Dad, you got to come get this. This is one of those unique ones. This is right from this predates all that institutionalized stuff that you're always looking for." And when you go back and see what people were thinking about back then, you realize how poorly the institutions of our modern day have served us. And they led us really down the wrong road. And it's only confirmed what I've always believed. Again, I don't just believe something and try to build my assumptions around it. You know, I have my thoughts on things based on instinct and experience, and then the information will take you where it takes you. And they were on the right path when this book was written. And we got off the path in dramatic ways and came up with all the wrong conclusions to satisfy the necessities of institutionalism instead of the pursuit of truth and science. And so this brings us up, and they don't really talk about it in here. Not really. But my fascination is most of these mounds contained giant skeletons that were discovered in the same adventurous period that this book was written. Obviously, you see the tone of the book, the kind of people they were writing to. This is the kind of thing that was a very lucrative book at the time, written for the mood of the Victorian age and the discovering of cultures outside of Europe and what they meant. And they were more honest about their assessment because they didn't have any preconceived notions about what they were. But what makes a book like this valuable is it's a good gauge to say, what are the textbooks coming out of Duke University and Ohio State and everybody studying these sciences? What are they studying now, and what are they telling them? And you find out they're wrapped up in a lot of left-wing politics, and then they try to build timelines and assumptions and discoveries around that because that's where you get your grant money. But when you had adventurers who just loved the spirit of adventure and they were out there looking for ways to understand what they were observing, these giant bones coming out of these mounds, and who were they? And did they connect themselves to the Nephilim from the Bible? Is it the giants that were talked about in the Bible? And you have a secular institution that took over education that says, no, we can't have any reference to the Bible. We can't have any reference to any of this timeline. We have to establish a narrative and stick to it. And these guys were kooks, and they didn't have the modern tools we have, so they weren't equipped to study and make presentations of anything. But again, I lived was growing up and lived in the region, and nobody in school, nobody anywhere talked about that. And that was one of the most magnificent earthworks in the world, and that includes Stonehenge and Avebury and places like that. And it was right across from downtown Hamilton, and nobody talked about it. Nobody did any research. No one was digging. Only now are individuals getting back to the spirit of adventure that wrote books like this one, and they're getting back out there and they're bypassing institutions, and the institutions don't like it, and they're doing their own research because the orthodox in the box institutions wouldn't do it. And so the necessity for human beings to discover things for themselves is more important than the institution's preservation of their timelines and the power they acquire through grant money funding their research, because it doesn't take us to the truth we all need and want to know. And it starts with observing something and asking questions. Well, who made it, and why they make it, and how old is it, and how does it fit into who we are today? And we should have an easy answer to that. But instead, we get left-wing politics that have embedded themselves in institutionalism and taken us down a path none of us wanted to go. And now we're rejecting all that institutionalism, and we're returning back to the adventure of discovery. And that is embodied in books like this. It's why my daughter said, "Dad, it's one of those books, you got to come get it," which I did. And I'm glad I have it, because it more than anything, it tells you exactly where we are today compared to where we were yesterday, and how we actually went downhill instead of uphill, and learned more. We knew more here than we do now, because institutions took us down the wrong path. And a lot of ways they did it on purpose to preserve a control over a narrative that they never deserved to have in the first place. So just some lessons to learn about education and institutions and how much you can trust them. And sometimes you have to go back before they were created to get to the truth, which is in the case of this wonderful book. Prehistoric World or Vanished Races. Wonderful stuff. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you ever read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.
Thank you for listening.